Her hands moved fast, fingers blackened with grease, riveting gun vibrating against her palms as another piece of aluminum locked into place. The noise was deafening. Hammers, drills, the roar of engines being tested 2 hangars over. She didn't flinch anymore. This was her 5th B-24 this month, and every time one rolled out of the factory doors, she knew it was heading straight into the fire over Europe or the Pacific. But right now, in this moment, the only thing that mattered was making sure this rivet held. The war would end. The bombers would stop flying. And then they told her to go home and wash the dishes. How does a girl from a quiet street end up holding the weight of a bomber in her hands? How does someone who'd never seen the inside of a factory become one of the people who kept the war effort alive? And what happens when the world decides it doesn't need her anymore? Before the war, life looked simple. A small town somewhere in Middle America, tree-lined streets, a main drag with a diner and a 5 and dime, Sunday service at the white church on the corner. Girls grew up expecting marriage, maybe a job as a store clerk or a seamstress if they needed extra money. Industrial work? That was men's territory. Factories were loud, dirty, dangerous places where fathers and brothers clocked in and came home exhausted. She had dreams, sure. Maybe she wanted to travel, to see a city, to do something that felt bigger than the life her mother had lived. But the world didn't offer much room for those dreams. High school ended, and the question everyone asked was simple. When was she getting married? The future felt predictable, safe, maybe a little boring. She couldn't have imagined what was coming. But across the ocean, decisions were already being made. Decisions that would drag her and millions of women like her out of that predictable life and into something no one saw coming. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. The radio crackled with the news, and suddenly everything changed. Men started enlisting by the thousands, heading off to training camps, to ships, to bases they'd never heard of. The town felt emptier every week. And back home, the factories that had been humming along, making cars and appliances, started retooling for war. Tanks, planes, guns. The country needed steel and wings and rivets, and it needed them fast. But who was going to build them? The men were gone. The assembly lines couldn't stop. So the call went out. Women, step up. Posters appeared on walls and in newspapers, strong women in overalls, sleeves rolled up, holding riveting guns. We can do it. Do the job he left behind. The message was clear. This wasn't just about work. It was about patriotism, duty, survival. She heard about the aircraft plant from a friend who'd already gone. The pay was shockingly good. More than she ever made, more than most women could dream of. Training provided, room and board nearby. And beyond the money, there was something else. The chance to be part of something that mattered. So she bought a one-way ticket, packed a single suitcase, and said goodbye to the only place she'd ever known. She had never been farther than the next county. Now a one-way ticket would change everything. The plant was bigger than anything she'd ever seen. Massive hangars stretched in every direction, ceilings so high they disappeared into shadow. Half-built bombers sat in rows like metal skeletons, wings, fuselages, tail sections, waiting to be joined together. The noise hit like a physical force, hammers pounding, drills screaming, metal scraping against metal, engines roaring as they were tested for the first time. The smell of oil and hot metal filled the air, and everywhere she looked, people were moving. Thousands of workers, most of them women, all focused on the same goal. Training was fast. They didn't have time to waste. She learned how to operate a riveting gun, how to read blueprints, how to work in tight spaces inside a wing or fuselage where every rivet had to be perfect because lives depended on it. Some women welded, some inspected, some operated cranes that lifted entire sections of aircraft into place. The work was hard.
Outside the factory, life wasn't much easier. Rationing meant everything was scarce. Sugar, meat, gasoline, even shoes. The boarding houses near the plant were crowded, noisy, shared bathrooms and thin walls. Women with children faced an even harder choice. Who would watch the kids while they worked? Daycare barely existed. Some plants set up makeshift nurseries, but most women had to piece together help from neighbors, relatives, anyone who could spare a few hours. And then there were the letters. Letters from brothers, fiancés, husbands fighting overseas. Some letters stopped coming. Every time a telegram car pulled up near the factory gates, everyone froze, waiting to see whose door it would stop at. The war wasn't just something happening far away. It was everywhere, pressing down on every moment, every conversation, every day. She was holding the line at home, building the machines that would bring the boys back. But no one told her what would happen when the shooting finally stopped. May 8th, 1945. Germany surrendered. August 15th, 1945. Japan surrendered. The celebrations were wild, streets flooded with people, car horns blaring, strangers hugging strangers. The war was over. The nightmare was done. For a few days, it felt like the whole world exhaled. But inside the factory, the mood shifted fast. Management started talking about reconversion, retooling the lines to make peacetime products, cars and refrigerators instead of bombers. And almost immediately, the message became clear. Women, thank you for your service, but it's time to go home. The men were coming back from Europe and the Pacific, and they needed their jobs. Layoff notices went up, shifts got cut, some women were offered lower-paying positions in different departments, most were simply let go. It didn't matter that she'd spent 3 years building bombers. It didn't matter that she'd learned skills most men didn't have. It didn't matter that she'd kept the line running when no one else would. The country had needed her when the men were gone. But now the message was simple. Make room. Step aside. Go back to where you came from. After building hundreds of bombers, after holding a riveting gun like it was part of her own body, after proving to herself and everyone else that she could do this work, suddenly, she had no place on the assembly line she once kept alive. So she went back. Back to the small town, back to the quiet streets, back to a life that felt impossibly small after everything she'd done. She got married, maybe to the fiancé who'd come home from the war, maybe to someone new. She had children. She kept house. She cooked, cleaned, and listened to the factory whistles in the distance, whistles she no longer answered. Some women tried to keep working. A few managed to find jobs, though usually in lower-paying positions, secretaries, typists, store clerks. The man's work they'd done during the war was no longer available to them. Other women fought to stay, writing letters, protesting layoffs, arguing that they'd earned the right to keep their jobs. But the tide was against them. Society wanted things to go back to normal, and normal meant women at home. Still, something had changed. Deep down, in a place no one else could see, she remembered. She remembered the weight of the riveting gun, the roar of the factory, the pride of signing off on a perfect panel. She remembered what it felt like to be good at something hard, to be needed, to be more than just someone's wife or mother. And even though the world told her to forget, even though the history books would mostly ignore what she and millions of women like her had done, she didn't forget. Years later, sitting in her kitchen, she'd pull out an old photograph, a faded black and white image of a young woman in overalls, grease smudged on her face, standing under a bomber's nose art. That was her. That was real. And no matter how much the world tried to pretend it never happened, she knew the truth. She wasn't alone. More than 6 million American women entered the workforce during World War II, and many of them ended up in heavy industry, factories, shipyards, steel mills. They built the planes, tanks, ships, and guns that won the war. They learned skills no one thought they could master. They earned wages no one thought they deserved. And when it was over, most of them were pushed back into the roles they'd left behind. But the door had opened, even if it closed again for a while. The women who worked in those factories didn't just build bombers, they proved something. And in the decades that followed, as new generations of women fought for the right to work, to be paid fairly, to be taken seriously, they were standing on the shoulders of the factory girls who came before. She helped build the plane that ended the war. And then they told her to go home and wash the dishes. But she never forgot what her hands had built. And neither should we.